Okay, in this video we're going to talk about load balancers and how to create them and use them. And let's first discuss what the purpose is. So we need load balancers to balance loads from, let's say, when you have a lot of users using your web server. So you don't want to just have a single web server instance running. You can have multiple web servers running behind a load balancer, and the load balancer will balance the load for more or less evenly among the different web servers that you have. So you could have 3 web servers behind it, you could have 5, you could have 10, and the load balancer will do its best to equally balance the load, so that way you're not overstressing any one web server. Okay, so in this example that we're going to do here, we're going to create three EC2 instances, and each one's going to be running a web server, and we're going to put those web servers behind a load balancer. So the first thing that we're going to do is create the load balancer here. So I'm in my EC2 console, and under load balancing, here under load balancers, and I'm going to create a load balancer. So for our purposes, we're going to create an HTTP load balancer. This is also called an application load balancer, or ALB. There's also a network load balancer, which we're not going to be covering in this video. So you create the load balancer here, then we'll give it a name. So we'll say test load balancer. This will be an internet-facing load balancer. You could also have something that's internal, so that's not open to the internet, but for our purposes it will be. And here you're going to specify the availability zones that it's available in. So you can, so the load balancer is specific to your VPC and all the availability zones within your region, so where that VPC is. So in our case, we can say, we don't have to select all of them, we can select, let's say, 3 of them. So the A, B, and C availability zones, we can have this load balancer working in. Then we can configure security settings, and then so this is the security group that AWS wants you to create. So we're going to create a new security group, and we're going to call it test load balancer. And as you can see, like, we want to just have port 80 open. So to the outside world, it's going to be port 80. That's how let's say our clients, when we do the test today, we're going to just access the load balancer on port 80. We could also add the SSL port. So yeah, let me see if I could find it. Or HTTPS. There's HTTPS right here, and that's 443. And again, so you could access it through HTTP or HTTPS. And then we got that. And then this is the next thing. This is important. So the load balancer can balance, can send the request to target groups. So you need to have at least one target group to send the request to. So it doesn't send them to the EC2 instances directly. It sends them to a target group, and the target group will have EC2s registered to it. So for our purposes, we're going to create a target group. We'll call it, again, test web server. It's an instance type target group. It's going to be on the HTTP protocol, and there's going to be health checks here as well. So the load balancer, it does its best to make sure that the instances behind it are actually healthy. It can accept requests. So it's going to do these regular health checks on those instances to make sure that they can serve requests. And you could customize it with different things here, but the main thing is it needs to return a code 200 when it does the test. And there's a certain number of tests that it can do before it considers an instance healthy or unhealthy, and you can configure all that here. So we'll just leave the defaults, and we'll say register targets. So right now we don't have any targets because we didn't create any EC2 instances. So we're just creating our load balancer. So we'll say review and create. Great. So now it's creating this load balancer. It takes a couple of minutes. as you can see, the state is provisioning. And then if we look in the target groups, that's the target group that we just created, test web server. And then if you look here, there's no targets. It needs at least one target, ideally more, to have the load balancer sending requests to. So now what we're going to do is, while that's provisioning, we're going to go here to the instances and actually create 3 EC2 instances, and which will add to that target group. So let's do this one here. So Linux 2 AMI, the T2 micro instance type. And then here, this is where we're going to customize it. So we're going to say 3. So it's going to create 3 all at the same time using the default VPC. For the subnet, we're going to say A, because we did say that the load balancer would only serve requests in the first 3 availability zones, and this is the subnet in the first availability zone. So let's do this part here, the user data. So the user data, we're going to specify here to install Apache web server and then to have it print a unique message. So here's the script. It's going to install Apache web server. It's going to start that service. It's going to make sure that if you reboot the instance, the service will keep running. And then it's going to print this very unique name, the host name of that EC2 instance. So when we access the home page, it's going to show like hello world from, and then it'll be the host name of that instance, which will have the internal IP address. So then we'll know exactly which instance is actually serving the request. So I'm going to copy this script, and I'm going to put it here in the user data, and then I'm going to go to the next screen. The storage is fine. We'll add the tags, test web server. We'll configure the security group. Okay, so the security group, this is something that we already set up before. We already have a security group for the web server, which is here. And this will allow any traffic on port 80, and then it'll allow SSH and pinging from my specific IP address. Okay, so we can use that, and we're going to change that later, but I'm going to show you first how to do it kind of standard way. So now let's review this and launch. So this is just going to launch right now with this key pair that you have to have a key pair to access the instances. So we're going to launch these 3 instances right now, and it's going to show them as right here. So these bottom 3, right? Okay, these top 3 right here. So I'm going to just name these 1, 2, and 3. So test web server 1, test web server 2, and test web server 3. So they're each launching with their own copy of the Apache web server, and so right now they're going to be publicly accessible, and we'll be able to before we add them to the load balancer. I just want to show that you can access them in separately without the load balancer. So right now, as they're coming up, we can check the IP address. So like for instance, let's check the first one. Okay, it's showing as running right now. So let's say this first one, the IP is 54.226.145.240. If I copy that, let me see if I can access it. Okay, so there it is. Hello world from 172.31.16.204, and that matches with the private IP here. Okay, then let's say I do go to the second one, and I copy that, and I paste it. So now I got a different IP, 31.17.209, and that's right here, 31.17.209. And then if I go to the third one, I copy its public IP there. So now we got 172.31.30.186. And then here it is, 172.31.30.186. Okay, so now we have these three EC2 instances are up. They're all working. They all have a web server installed, and they're all displaying a custom web page that's specific to that instance. Great. Now what we're going to do is we're going to register these three EC2 instances to the target group that we already created, which is going to be part of the load balancer. So if we go back to the target groups, which are here, and here is our target group, now we're ready to register some EC2 instances. So let's see. So here we go. So it shows you now these three. Here they are, Test Web Server 1, 2, and 3. We're going to select them all. We're going to add them to the registered. And now we're going to save this. Okay. And it says none of these availability zones contain a healthy target. So I think it's because the EC2 instances aren't up yet fully. So the health checks haven't passed, and so that's why it's saying that it should go away very shortly. Also, when you add them, as you can see here, target registration process is in progress. So they're not going to be available right away. You have to give it about maybe a few seconds or a minute before it becomes part of the target group. But the main thing is that now they're being added to the target group. Let's just see if those instances came up. So you see they're still initializing. They haven't passed the health checks yet. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how we're going to access it. So right now, they're each accessible by themselves. I can go to each one directly because they each have a public IP. But ideally, I shouldn't be able to do that. I shouldn't be able to kind of bypass the load balancer, because once they're part of the load balancer, the only way I should really be able to access them is through the load balancer. So I'm going to show you how to do that. But for now, let's just see if we can access the load balancer. So, okay, when we go into the load balancer, it's going to have this DNS name. So this DNS name, this is the actual URL that we're going to use to access the load balancer. If I copy that, and if I paste it here, okay, there. Now you see how it's now routing that request to one of the EC2 instances. If I refresh this, you see how the display changed, because now it's the second one. If I refresh it again, now it's the third one. So it keeps, you see how it keeps cycling between the three in an even manner. So as I'm refreshing the page, it's routing it to a different EC2 instance. Okay, cool. Now, what we want to do now is we want to stop being able to access the EC2 instance directly. So the way to do that is we're going to update the security group for the EC2 instances. And if we go into the security group here, and this is our web server right here, and if you see here, see, we allow port 80 from anywhere. Well, we don't want that. What we want to do now that these EC2 instances are part of the load balancer, we want to update this. We want to say, instead of being able to access them anywhere, if you say SG, and now we can reference another security group, and now we're going to reference the load balancer security group, like this. And this one we can erase because that was for IPv6, which we don't have to worry about. Same with this, we'll erase that, that's IPv6. And then for here, for HTTPS, we'll do the same thing. We'll say SG, and then the load balancer. So only requests from the load balancer, so basically only those requests from the load balancer are able to access any of the EC2 instances. Okay, now what this means is if we try and access the EC2 instances now directly, it's not going to work. So if we go back to our EC2 instances, okay, here's the first one. So let's say we take this public IP, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to just go to this page now, so you could see that it's not going to load. If I paste in the public IP, see, it's going to keep spinning because it's not, you can't, we've prevented now from just accessing those instances publicly. Same thing for the second and third one. I'll just demonstrate on the second one. If we copy that public IP and I'll stop that and I'll paste it here, see, it doesn't load anymore. So the only way I can load is if I go to my load balancer and I copy the DNS name, which is here, and then only if I paste that DNS name, okay, now it's going to load it. So now it's showing there's one, here's another one, and there's the third one. Okay, great. So now we're accessing those 3 EC2 instances just through the load balancer. Okay, so the next thing I want to show you is stickiness. So you can have the load balancer, and now you have multiple EC2 instances behind it. But what happens if you're, let's say, in the middle of a e-commerce transaction, right? You don't want to have you don't want your requests to be routed to a different EC2 instance from the one that you started with. So if you're in the middle of a shopping cart, if you're in the middle of purchasing things or adding things to your cart, if you're routed to a different EC2 instance, you're going to lose that entire session. You're going to be logged out. You're going to have to log in. It's going to be a very bad experience. So this is why we have cookies. This is why we can keep track of a session data. So the load balancer supports the idea of stickiness, and it's done at the target group level. So let me show you how that works. So if we go to the target group, so here are 3 instances. This is our target group, test web server. And then if we select that target group and we say edit attributes and then stickiness, you can see a little explanation here. We can enable it. And then this is where we're going to choose the length of the stickiness. So for our purposes, I'm just going to make it relatively short. I'm just going to say 5 seconds. So what that means is if requests, the cookie will expire after 5 seconds. So if I have requests that are less than 5 seconds apart, it will continue routing those requests to the same EC2 instance. If I wait longer than 5 seconds, it's now going to expire that cookie, and then the next request will come from a different EC2 instance. So let's see how that's going to work. So let's say I do that, and then actually it'll even show here. So there's a stickiness enabled for 5 seconds. So if I go back here, I'm accessing the load balancer URL here. If I refresh, it's going to show a different IP address, which is fine. Okay, there. So it's showing 17.209. If I refresh it again, still showing 17.209. Refresh it again. See, as I'm refreshing it, it keeps showing the same one because I'm waiting less than 5 seconds between requests. But let's say I wait now more than 5 seconds. So let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I try it again. And now it's showing a different one. So now and if I make another request in less than 5 seconds, it keeps showing the same one. Okay, and if I wait 5 seconds now, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I try it again. There. So now it's showing a different EC2 instance. Okay, so that's how stickiness works with the Elastic Load Balancer. So that was it. I'm going to just do a cleanup now just to kind of show how to bring everything down. So once, just to kind of, let me show you, the load balancer is running and the target group is there. So the first thing I'm going to do for cleanup, I'm just going to kill or terminate the 3 instances. So they're right here. I'm going to select them. I'm going to say terminate. Okay, that's it. They're down. Now, if I try to access this, it's going to just time out. As you can see, it's just spinning now, so they're not accessible anymore. And then after I terminated those instances, I'm going to delete the load balancer. which is here. So I'm just going to say action delete. Okay, then I'm going to delete the target group. So now that's gone. Now I'm going to delete the security group that was associated with the load balancer. So if I look under here, actually before I do that, I'm going to go into the web server security group, and remember how I changed it to reference the load balancer security group? Well, now that we don't have a load balancer anymore, I'm gonna just say you can go back to accepting requests from anywhere. So that's this and this, okay? And then I'm going to delete the security group that we used for the load balancer, which is this one right here. And I'll just do that. Okay, and that's it. And now we are back to where we started.